Would you like to start with
Excellent.
housekeeping, Rico?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'd like to welcome you all to Poets in Response to Peril, a reading by Canadian poets expressing solidarity with Ukraine. And I'd like to begin, before we even get to the housekeeping, with the land acknowledgement. Let us first acknowledge that this event is going out to you from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the three fires known as the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. And I give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. I'd like to thank David Medill, CFP of BMO Nesbitt Burns, John Tamming of John Tamming Law, and in the estate of former library CEO Andrew Armitage for their generous support of the Poet Laureate program, and to the Poet Laureate Advisory Committee and the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Libraries, and Tim in particular for being our co-pilot today. So yes, as Penn said, a little bit of housekeeping. I see that a lot of you are here. This is fantastic. The turnout is absolutely amazing. This is looking to be a really, really exciting day. I would urge people to stay muted throughout until it's your time to do your reading. And that way it does several things. I mean, it prevents unwanted noises from coming in. It also helps with bandwidth. So that's always a useful thing. So we got Tim managing the back end kind of thing, and he'll look after any situations that might arise. If you've got any technical questions, you can connect with Tim in the chat, or you can connect with me in the chat, but I'll probably just direct you to Tim anyway. So, Poets in Response to Peril. It's a quote from the poem, from the preamble of the book that accompanies this. That's the complimentary book to this event. Today we gather a shield of beloved poets around us in an embrace of poetry, to provide the intimacy of a poem in response to the dreadful. That's one of the reasons why we turn to poetry. It expands our empathy. In expressing our sorrow or delight, poetry communicates the feeling to the wider community. It reaches across languages directly to the heart. It can serve as a witness to humanity at its worst and a celebration of humanity at its best. It provides succor in our direst moments. It provides confirmation that we have been seen, recognized, and understood. And in its sometimes discursive manner, it cuts through the starless night of disinformation like a searchlight. We hope then today that the poets who will read for us will offer the people of Ukraine and the people of the world a shield against the dreadful. And so I'd like to now turn the floor over to Penn, who, amongst other things, will illuminate us as to the origins and the genesis of this entire project. Penn.
I'll start with a land acknowledgement. And what I suggest everybody do is in the chat, write down their own version of their land acknowledgement. I'm greeting you from London Ont, the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, the I know how to say that, Ottawassane, peoples who've long been in relationship to the land and the water and the whole region of what we call Sowesto, southwestern Ontario. Local First Nations communities of this area include the Chippewas of the Thames, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation, and those all surround London Ont. On the Eskinasippi River, the Antler River, the Thames. So this whole venture began when really thinking about the word responsibility. And as a poet and as poets, what we have in terms of words is our ability to respond. And in the wake of such shock, waking up on February 24th, for me, the impetus, the real push, was channeling private grief, my husband's death last September, into the more general grief, the mourning, or the shock and horror of facing what is this generation's war. I was once living in a commune. In front of that commune was a stone gull. The dreadful has already happened. But in this, that's where the dreadful came. It's a big word for me, but in this case, the dreadful is ongoing. And one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize, although because of the immediacy of the media, we are concentrating here on Ukraine. We can't forget all those hidden places, the Eritrean, the Somalian, the Afghani still, all the different places which are more other than, I look at us, look, I see pale faces here, almost all. And we really need to acknowledge the hidden turmoil that we don't see, that we hear in passing. And that's another anthology for other people, but it's important. And also the indigenous, I'm so glad that the Pope Francis made some beginning towards an apology and action. And it's an astonishing thing, really, to see the power of words in action, of art in action. And I was thinking of my husband a lot, because he would have been the first to publish with me this project. He was the publisher of our little company, Penn Kemp Productions, that has published some of you. And I missed him terribly when I didn't have his expertise and his emotional support around me. But another impetus was that Marianne's publisher in Ukraine put out a plea for help, for words of encouragement. And she and her translator, Natalie, they are staying in Kyiv with their cats. And it just seems like such courage. So we were going to put all profits, this is new, you are the first to hear this, but we were the first to put, we were going to put our profits from this anthology toward UNICEF, and the government was matching funds, but Rico found out that program had ended. So we were searching around for suitable places, and Rico found a Penn organization, and that is Ukraine-based, so it's Ukraine Penn plus other NATO surrounding countries Penn. So, and that is supporting writers and artists, poets who have been affected either as migrants or just they're Ukrainians. So, and also, if you'd like to continue, the anthology is full up. It's 100 pages, 61 poems, and 48 of our very finest. That's you guys. And there should be a English word like vosotros or vous, as compared to two for the plural vous, the plural you, I mean. I'm going to, what I was going to say was, please send in the poems, the readings of your poems in response to Peril to Rico, and his email, I actually have it memorized. It's r_Sitoski@yahoo.com, and he will see you through the steps. So I'm very interested in the whole power of community as to what we've done in 5 weeks. It's really, it's what we can do, that other than send money. And I'm very interested in personal as political. And that, for me, as a poet and as a dreamer, results in the influence of world events in my dream life. And I had a vision this morning, early, and it became a poem, of course. Poem, Toward. On the morning of our Zoom, I dream, walking back home along Western Road, I'm transported to yellow-white expanses of wheat below the dome of cerulean sky. I've been longing to return here all my life. The ancestral steps of the Celts, heading alongside small clusters of migrants, each with a backpack, facing early morning sun, over the curve of the earth for home. The poem that I'm going to lead off with, and then I'll introduce Susan and our story, is well, that first poem, Home, called Toward, is the only hopeful poem that I've written out of this whole experience. The next one is Our Kind of Intimate, and the League of Poets. This is National Poetry Month, and that's our month to celebrate the power of words. They chose a theme of intimacy, which seemed both bizarre in the extreme and completely apt, given that the media has brought so much in our face right now, and always 24/7, it's right there. And I guess we need to remember also the power of the world outside, the power of forsythia whenever it does bloom outside. But I wrote I was commissioned to write a poem on intimacy and also a blog, and that will go up this month. So this is the poem, Our Kind of Intimate. What could be more intimate than constant streaming on our screens, images plastered on the occipital nerve, imprinted, planted, permanent? What more intimate than a deep love, roping in family, friends, and foreign faces on the web to our known orbit? In the knowledge that we are all one huge multi-armed beast we call humanity, backed for or against, wholly and alone. What could be more intimate than a marriage under siege, the bride bouquet between her and him in camouflage, weapons at the ready, a sharp pang of metal piercing flesh, the rude intrusion of steel into bone, sounds haunting the bloodstream linger along what once were halls of the bombed maternity hospice, children still under the walls, not to speak of infants, mothers in labor. What more intimate than the time when thought coalesces into form between pen and paper, text onto keyboard, before words arise and fall in place, a sacred alphabet arranged just so in orderly progression that never before has taken shape, as the poem is birthed. Its aftermath, crimson placenta of relief, grief, given way to gratitude. that something remains while entire civilizations collapse and fall. The fall resounding rings hollow down our ears. In our time and beyond, throughout the barriers of history being broken, the current kind of intimate intimidates us, not into submission, but to action. So this, thank you. We say what we can. May it reach our hearts and bring our hearts and minds and souls together and move us into action. What else is there? The project began basically with Susan McCaslin, who I think is still here, and just don't see her, but hi, Kate, I just saw you. There you are, good. And we were...
Now, am I unmuted or muted?
You're very allowed.
Oh, good.
You're allowed to be allowed. So Susan and I were talking about the line from Auden, "Poetry makes nothing happen," which he wrote in a hugely beautiful tribute to W.B. Yeats. And we talked back and forth about art in action, and it became a dialogue that was published in Saging and in a couple of other places, a long dialogue. And then on February 24th, she'll tell you, she wrote up and she wrote a few people, maybe Yvonne is one of them, I don't know, to write something about how poetry matters, what poetry matters. And I, of course, got excited. And when I got excited, I start writing. When I start writing, I start blogging. So it became a blog, and I pulled a lot of other people in, and all of you are here. And some of you are on those blogs on Penn Kemp at WordPress.com. And it went over 4 or 5. And then I thought, well, let's do a chapbook. We'll do a chapbook of these poems and these thoughts. Why not? That would be easy. And then the chapbook became this 100-page anthology. And I brought in Richard-Yves Sitoski, who just happened to be just happened to be my neighbor for a while. And that's when Marianne came in with her message from the publisher saying, encourage us. So we took a video encouraging from Canadian poets to Ukrainian poets and artists and publishers, and then it snowballed, and here we all are. So that's my introduction to Susan, who will be introducing Russell and Svetlana as well. Thank you, Susan.
Anyone here? Yes?
You're on.
Great. Yes, I did do that dialogue on Auden's poem, and I'm just going to read it because the lines of poetry have often been content. And what we were interested in is to look at the broader implications of what he was saying, and also apply it to this time because of the deep heaviness we were feeling about what was happening in Ukraine and has happened throughout history. And yet poetry goes back to antiquity. The earliest people were telling stories, tribes, chanting, and so on. And poetry is the basis of arts and culture, which is what the Ukrainian people are fighting for right now. Their land, their connection to the earth, their heritage. And many Ukrainian poets are amazing poets that I'm just starting to delve into because of this. And I'm just so impressed with the richness of the Ukrainian love of poetry, and to think that it is not irrelevant in times of peril. So I'm just going to read the little bit from Auden, and then I'll introduce Svetlana and Russell. For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. Flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives, a way of happening, a mouth. And so in a way, it's a paradox. He's saying it makes nothing obviously happen in the immediate. Sometimes it seems like in this situation, it's not preventing Putin from doing what he's doing, but the longevity of poetry, its rootedness in our interconnectedness with the earth, with each other, with the solar system, means it has a much longer and broader and wider trajectory. And I think that's why poets want to enter the mystery of the realm of words, and how, even though things seem unspeakable, the language wants to speak beyond words, to include and transcend language, concepts, ideas, and through rhythm and musicality and the other features that poetry brings to our human condition, and that we share with the creatures who sing and play and so on. So in this passage, I think Auden is comparing poetry to a river, the flow, and yet also a mouth, which could be the mouth of a river, but the mouth of someone speaking words that speak collectively to our human condition and our interconnectedness and our love for each other. So that's where I'm going to stop. But it was interesting the way that I looked back at that dialogue, and then I thought, oh, wow, I'm feeling so depressed. You know, does poetry matter? And I thought that I would like to hear all the different voices about that today. And that's what I'm looking forward to. But I'd like to turn now to my preliminary remarks about the opening, which we're going to hear right after I finish. So I'm just going to say that I'm speaking from the unceded territory of the Kwantlen First Nations people in just outside Fort Langley, British Columbia. I don't use the chat line because I find it way too distracting when I'm presenting. So when Penn and Rico and I proposed a reading topic, a poetry reading on the topic of how, why, and whether poetry matters in time. Hello? Was that an interruption?
Yes, it was.
Oh dear. Okay. We realize that the Ukrainian people fighting for survival in the epicenter of an unjustifiable war's brutality are suffering in ways many of us living on the outskirts can barely imagine. Yet we stand in solidarity, each in our own way, doing what we can as fellow human beings and poets to be of help. History has shown that poetry, like other art forms, outlasts the evils of dictators and autocrats, yet doesn't prevent the intensity of suffering for those trapped in the cruelties of time. When thinking about how to open this reading, I recalled that my friend Russell Thornton and his wife, Svetlana Ischenko, both of them poets and translators, have produced a marvelous volume of translations by the revered Ukrainian poet Dmytro Kremen, who lived from 1953 to 2019. Therefore, we asked Svetlana and Russell if they would grace this event by reading from their volume, Poems from the Scythian Wild Field, a selection from the poetry of Dimitro Kremen, Ecstasis Editions 2016. We are most grateful that they generously agreed. Svetlana will read 2 of his poems in Ukrainian so we can hear the sounds of the language, and Russell will read the same poems in English. Kremen, having lived through a series of devastating social and political disasters in his homeland, offers us words that ground our readings in the soil and culture of Ukraine. And Svetlana Ischenko is from Mykolaiv, forgive my pronunciation, Ukraine, where she was a writer and an actress with the Ukrainian National Theatre of Drama and Musical Comedy. She now lives in Canada. Russell Thornton is a Canadian poet whose most recent book is Answer to Blue, 2021. Other books by him have been shortlisted for the Griffin Prize and the Governor General's Award. And I just want to mention that if you'd like to purchase this book, it's available through Ecstasis Editions in Victoria, BC, and you just go to their website, and Ecstasis is spelled E-K-S-T-A-S-I-S. So with that, I'd like to introduce or give them the floor. We're going to be leading off with Svetlana's words in the Ukrainian language. So, well, thank you, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. And yes, I'm from Mykolaiv, Ukraine. And just before I start reading, Susan asked me to kind of talk a little bit about poetry in Ukraine. And I'd like to mention that in Ukraine, poetry plays a more significant role in people's lives than in Canada. The whole society will listen to a wise bard, something like in Celtic culture few hundred years ago. In Ukrainian, we have a word, kobzar, which refers to a poet-musician who sings his own lyrics with a guitar or kobza or bandura. The most famous Ukrainian poet is Taras Shevchenko, who lived in 19th century. And his best known work...
Can you unmute yourself, please?
It's Billy Amstad who is interrupting.
Yeah, interruption. And Taras Shevchenko's work, best known, is titled Kobzar. Poetry readings in Ukraine can attract large numbers of people. It's perfectly common to see 100 or 150 at a poetry reading. When public libraries, schools, or colleges and universities invite popular poets for poetry readings at their facilities, the audience can run well into hundreds and even more. I have participated in many poetry readings in Ukraine, and most recently in 2017, I read in my native city of Mykolaiv at the local public library. And it was the launch of the book of English translations of the poetry of Dmitro Kremen, Poems from the Scythian Wild Field. On that occasion, Dmitro read in Ukrainian and I read in English. But today, I will read in Ukrainian and Russell Thornton will read in English. The first poem I want to read is one of Dmitro Kremen's signature poems. It's called The Lost Manuscript. Загублений манускрипт. Київську бібліотеку спалиш, не Олександрійську, то й простять. А чорний сніг, а біла Галич уже з Чорнобиля летять. Київ, Київ, Київ не Афіни, але й тут моголи сарацин, і чорний попіл України, і дим із дантових терцин. Сніг у кончі, бранець волі й честі плаче в тузі, похилив чоло. Спалити рукопис, довести, що нас на світі й не було, у яку гірку халепу влипти, і про все історія змовчить, а вже палають манускрипти, і сніг з Чорнобиля летить. А Галя сіє чорнобривці посеред лютої зими, і плачуть птахи-самовбивці, щоб ми зосталися людьми. And Russell will read in English.
The same poem in English. The Lost Manuscript. If you burn the Kiev library, not the one at Alexandria, they'll forgive you. And the black snow and the white crows, they are already in flight from Chernobyl. Kiev, Kiev, Kiev is not Athens, but here too are Mongols and Saracens and the black ashes of Ukraine and smoke from Dante's tercets. It's snowing in Concha. A recruit of freedom and honesty is bowing his head and weeping. To burn a manuscript is to try to prove that we never existed in the world. And what bitter trouble you have gotten into, and how silent history will be about it all. And already manuscripts are burning, and the snow from Chernobyl is flying. And a woman is sowing seeds of marigolds in the middle of a fierce winter. And suicidal birds are crying so that we will remain as a people.
Yes. The second poem that I will read in Ukrainian, it's called The Ashes of an Eyewitness. Не ти, не я, так промовляє попіл. І досі ми не вийшли із окопів, а вже новітню маємо журбу. Є Вольво й шмотки, дикуни культурні. Та Ольвію й світанок на кінбурні ми ловимо у стереотрубу. Багато їх озлоблених і лютих, планета ж на останньому витку. І звірі прокидаються у людях. І дума їх не в маршах, не в салютах, а в крові тій, спожитій на швидку. Цей манускрипт із дикопільських прерій. О, як я самовидцем тут живу, пару свічу, а попелом імперій тут не одну посипано главу. А я про те ж, про солов'я в діброві, та про банальну в хижий вік любов. В час озвіріння звірі прагнуть крові. Невже й справді найдешевша кров? Засяду за літописом. А все-таки і я в комп'ютерленді доживу, де український Гамлет з гомілетики знов посипає попелом главу. Ти ренесансом і бароко мариш, але забудь їх, древніх як вербу. Летить, летить із неба попіл згарищ і застеляє стереотрубу. Про що твої шепочуть, мила губи? Любов мою, життя моє візьми.
And here's the English, or a translation of the English. The ashes of an eyewitness. It is not you nor I, it is the ashes saying this. We have not yet gotten out of the trenches, but we already know a new sorrow. We have Volvo and imported clothing. Savages have become educated. But through a stereoscope, we can catch sight of Olvia and the sunrise over Kinburn. Many are angry and ferocious. Our planet is in its last orbit, and the worst is waking in people. And they think nothing of custom, ceremony, design. They think only of the quickest way to shed others' blood. This manuscript is from the wild field. Oh, how do I live here as an eyewitness? I burn a single candle, but more than one head has been covered here with the ashes of empires. And still I talk about things like a nightingale in the oak forest and a banal love in these savage times. Since everyone has become an animal and wants blood, is it true now that the cheapest thing is blood? I'll sit down at the Chronicle for a while, but still I'll also end my life in computer land, where a Ukrainian Hamlet of homiletics spreads ashes on his head. You dream of the Renaissance and the age of the Baroque, but forget about them. They are as ancient as a willow tree. The ashes of burnt fires are flying down out of the sky and blocking a stereoscope. The whispering on your lips. What is it about, my dear? Take my love, take my life. When the trumpets of death begin to sound, will we have time to say goodbye to one another? We'll pass away with honor while the surma is playing. Cranes will rustle by us, our souls, and ashes will fall into palms, and I'll turn up my palms for you from under the ground.
Thank you. It's hard to imagine that Dmytro Kremen wrote these poems in 1999. And it's like a prediction of all what is happening now. It's these poems are from his book Peril that was published in 1999 and won the Taras Shevchenko Prize, the most prestigious poetry award in Ukraine. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Svetlana and Russell, for this. How do I live here as an eyewitness? That's a question I think we can all ask ourselves, considering what's going on. So what I'd like to do now then is proceed, interestingly enough, in alphabetical order by first name. Now, I know that not everybody who has agreed to read today is in fact here in the room, so it'll be kind of strange, even though I have a list of people just to my right there who are ostensibly here. I'll still ask as we go along, are you in the house, and will you be ready? So the first person to read will be Albert Dumont, and that means that Bänoo Zan is on deck. So I would like to turn the floor over to Albert.
My name is Albert Dumont. I'm going to read today from Ottawa, the unceded, never surrendered lands of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. First, I'm going to read two poems. One is an original poem, and this is it. It's called The Tears I Shed. I am not a small ball of light, floating, zigzagging, dodging, while in a state of everlasting joy. I am not a small ball of light, without purpose in a universe of countless stars. The tears I shed when the cruelty of this world bites deep into the hearts and spirits of innocent people tell me I am a human being with a heart which can scream out in protest, a human being who can push harm away from others less fortunate than myself. This poem is a poem that I wrote with Second World War veterans in mind. I call it I Will Remember You. I will remember you when the birds sing their songs from the branches of budding leaves, and when ripened berries send their soothing fragrance into the soft and gentle breeze. I will remember you when the trees of the rolling hills hold colors of orange, red, and yellow, and when Mother Earth sleeps under white and crystal layers of a deep and sparkling snow. I will remember you, for when you extended your caring hand, I was given hope. Miigwech.
Gwitch, gwitch.
Jimmy Wedge, Albert. That was beautiful. And so Bänoo is up, and that means that Celeste Snowber, you are going to be on deck. So Bänoo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to organizers and participants, readers, and those who are here to support. My name is Bänoo Zan. I'm an immigrant from Iran. I've been here since 2010 and very much involved in the poetry community. But frankly, I had come not to expect any response to perils around the world from the literary community in Canada. So Ukraine actually made me see the elephant in the room. What I would like to invite all of us to do, I would like to see panels, readings, calls for submissions for tragedies around the world. Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Asia, and not only when things happen in Europe. And now please join me in a moment of silence for all those people for whom we did not organize anything. Thank you. I have, in fact, written about Ukraine, and it is published. I have written about Afghanistan, about places in Africa and Europe. But for today, I have picked a poem that was published in 2018 in Arc Poetry magazine. Emily Dickinson has a poem that starts with these lines. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. This poem is titled My Labor and My Leisure. 1. The torturer's livelihood draws pain. He waterboards suspects for bread. Sleep deprives dreams with diligence. At home, he keeps the screams and spasms to himself. He is hardworking, doesn't neglect the duty of horror. 2. If the arms deal is canceled, The Canadian hire cannot manufacture death, and his family goes hungry. He's a good worker. The weapons are working. We don't see the Saudi opposition on TV. 3, the IT guy is a genius. The surveillance technology he created is ordered by dictators who suppress dissent and arrest activists. 4, are these workers unionized? Do they enjoy equal pay for equal work? Do politicians protect their jobs? 5, they work for companies that pay taxes to governments that provide welfare, art, and culture. 6, the Prime Minister is good looking and well spoken. 7, a woman in labor is admitted to the world's best hospital. She gives birth to a rapist, a mass murderer, and a war criminal. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bänoo. That was hard hitting. And I'm very glad that you put this conflict in a world context and highlighted our blind spots when it comes to world events, and that we as poets have an obligation to everybody on the planet. So thank you for that. Celeste, you are now up, and that means that Blaine Marchand is on deck.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for all organizing this. I'm Celeste Snowber, and I'm coming to you today from the Kakite First Nation, which I'm very thankful for. I'm going to read you a few poems from my book, The Marrow of Longing, which explores my own Armenian identity. My mother was an Armenian genocide survivor of the 1915, the first genocide of the 20th century. And I'm exploring fragments to understand my own identity. And this is called The Story of One. If we only have fragments, aren't all our pieces a whole? What happens to one happens to all. So much has gone missing. Strands of DNA whisper a mystery. The story of one is the survival of a nation. The next poem is called Voices Must Not Vanish, which is in the anthology. Prophets, poets, and scholars call us to remembering. What is lost is returned. What is broken is opening. Armenia woven in my fibers and tissues. Each grief is part of our grief. Recognize what is not recognized. Tell it again and again. Ancestries missing, villages and cities wiped out, names changed forever. Survivors did not often share the horrors. Remember what is lost, open what is broken, right what is whole. And I was so moved by Svetlana's and Russell's work. I'm just going to read this other short poem because I feel it connects to what they said. It's called Illuminata. We are all illuminated, walking manuscripts and women's scripts. Etched hutchcars, stories live in scripted cellular memory beneath the skin. We are scriptoria, writing our narratives, co-creation. Light cracks the wounds. Here's a fact. 31,000 Armenian illuminated manuscripts survive after invasions and massacres. Our hope is us. We are the luminosity of living parchment. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Celeste. Walking manuscripts and women manuscripts. Yes, I like that. I'm glad somebody said that. Like somebody in history has actually said that. I love that. So that means that Blaine Marchand is up and Marsha Barber is coming up next.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to just read one poem. There's two in the anthology. I'll read one of them. I want to thank Richard and Penn and Susan for putting together this anthology. I think it's an important anthology. During the pandemic, I took up walking big time in the afternoons. I write poems in the morning and I walk in the afternoon. And I went out for a walk on March 1st. And this poem came to mind. I started to work on it, and it opens with a quotation from, and I apologize, I probably am pronouncing this name wrong, but Taras Shevchenko, who wrote it in 1858. It was called Fate. Keep marching on, their glory lies, march forward, that's my testament. And it was translated by Canadian poet John Weir. In like the lamb of weather lore, the bluster today creates chaos. Cars skid and slide along side streets. My footsteps have no grip. Last month's occupation of downtown is still fraught in me. Deep inside bedrock, dissolved by trapped water, a sinkhole opening up a depression. High black barricades riddle intersections, narrows of no man's land, along which the wind twists and curves snow. Yowls past shuttered storefronts. And now the assault on Ukraine. The torrent of missiles are as barraged buildings collapse in rubble. The deluge of winter-clad people fleeing along city roads and highways. At borders, barricades, fathers and sons turn back, torn from clutches of their distraught families, mouths salty with tears. Framed beneath a charred arc of skeletal trees. Amid the destruction, their words are resolute, place hope in each lengthening day. The sun golden as a wheat field, in spring's warming lapis sky. What can I do? The world's brutality fills my mouth with grit. I must learn from them to form poems of resilience, echo voices longing to return from exile. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Blaine. The bluster today creates chaos. And there's a lot of bluster out there and there's a lot of chaos. So Marsha Barber, you're up next. And that means that Caroline Morgan DiGiovanni is following you. So Marsha, if you please.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to see everyone here today, united for this important cause. And thank you to the organizers. I'm going to read two poems from the anthology. The first one is called Prayer for Ukraine. My grandmother, Rebecca, from Lithuania, ran from the pogroms with one tiny leather suitcase. Her mother, Rachel, tried to jam her feet into small white winter boots over and over, but the boots were still stuffed with paper fresh from the market. In their panic, no one realized. All they knew, Rebecca and Rachel, was they had to flee from the heavy black boots of the Cossacks. And now, in Ukraine, children are pulling on winter boots, their warmest coats, fleeing once again. The world is filled with Cossacks and those who must run from them. Let it be filled instead with welcoming harbors, train stations where volunteers ladle soup, and warm homes where children can take off their boots and leave them safely outside the door. Rain. In Ukraine, they are bombing maternity wards. Mothers move from beds to shrouds, babies from wombs to tiny graves, lungs singed by fire-filled air, the breath of war, hot and sour, envelops soft new limbs. Mothers with empty arms, milk dripping from ruined breasts, babies gone, no chance to suck. Death rains from clouds, purposeful and precise, as screams rise like smoke towards indifferent sky. Thanks.
And one of the reasons why we're doing this is so that our skies not be indifferent. So thank you very much, Marsha. So Caroline, Morgan DiGiovanni, and let's see if Charlie Petch is in the house. I don't believe so. I believe Charlie is, yes, has otherwise engaged. So that means that David Bridges will follow Caroline.